Today I am here with my review of the book Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks. Now, Elle is a booktuber and naturally an author, and her book Peace and Turmoil is coming out in March of this year. I was lucky enough to be selected to receive an advanced reader copy for review, and that's what I'm here with today. Now, I have done a very long and detailed review over on my Goodreads, so I will link that down below for you, and if you want extra detail then do go and check that out, because this is just going to be a brief overview and gush really, because this book was 100% 5 stars. No doubt in my mind whatsoever. It was an incredible book just generally, and then add to the fact that it's a debut novel and it's really impressive. Now, it's epic fantasy, so I can't really tell you too much about the plot because, like with all epic fantasy, it's a slow build and I'm always really conscious of spoilers, especially with epic fantasy. But we have a large cast of characters who live in a land called Abram, and most of them live in different countries within the land of Abram from each other, and each of these countries is very different, very separate, and there's a lot of politics going on, and politics is probably one of the biggest factors that is moving the plot forward in this book, and it is very intricate, it's very complicated. And even though I could tell as a reader as I was going through the book that everything that was happening was completely relevant, I couldn't figure out at any point where it was all going until we sort of got there. And then it was almost like a massive shock moment, but I sort of thought, well, you know, it shouldn't have been a shock moment because I've been given all the clues to get myself here, but I didn't get here by myself, which I think is a mark of really good writing, because it means that the author is giving you all of the tools, but in such a way that they get to give you the big reveal, you don't get to figure it out. So I really enjoyed that element of it, and all of those shock moments were entirely within character. I never found myself thinking, well, I don't think that that character would do that, because they would, it's just that I didn't see it coming. So that was really interesting. Speaking of characters, like I said, we've got a very big cast. I personally can find it quite difficult to get my head around names, especially straight away. Once I've been with the characters for a while, I'm okay. But I'd say for about the first 25–30% of a book, I can struggle to get the names into my head. And that can make it a little bit complicated and difficult for me to follow plot lines sometimes in that first portion of an epic fantasy book. But actually that didn't seem to bother me so much with this one, because every character was so unique and distinct in their own personality that I was quite easily able to understand, just from the motivations and partly from where they were in the land of Abram, who they were, whether or not I recognised the name straight away. And that just made it a little bit more quick, I think, for me to pick up on the names and to follow the story in general, which as a reader I really appreciate, because I understand that that first portion of an epic fantasy can be a little bit difficult, so I would highly recommend this book if you are just getting started in epic fantasy, because I found it really easy to follow, and that is something that I generally struggle with at the beginning of epic fantasy, so I think that that was really helpful for me. In terms of the plot itself, there was, alongside the political manoeuvring, there was a lot of action, which again, it can be something I really struggle with in books in general, really, because I'm not a particularly visual person, so action scenes can be difficult for me to follow, especially if there's magic involved. But I found the action scenes in this book really easy to follow, and I can't put my finger on exactly why that was, but I didn't find myself confused at any point, and I actually was to a certain extent able to visualise what was going on. And in part I think that's because the magic system was really easy to follow. The magic system in Peace and Turmoil is sort of based on an elemental magic system, but the way of accessing those elements in this story are through the use of auroras, which everybody has access to, and you can call on an aurora and the corresponding element will respond. So you may call on a red aurora and you would produce fire. If you called on a clear aurora, you would call air, and so on. the thing I like about the magic system, and that I think is really, really unique in this book, is the fact that it's accessible to everyone. Everyone throughout the land of Abram can access magic, and that's quite unique in fantasy, I think, because quite often, at least I find in fantasy stories, there's only a select and arbitrary group of people who are able to access the magic, and usually that's based on sort of familial lineage of some kind. But in this story, that's not the case. Everybody can access magic, and the levels of proficiency are entirely dependent on how much time and effort and practice a person puts into their craft. So I really, really enjoyed that because it just felt a little bit more equal, and it also put a little bit more pressure in the background of the story, because you never could quite tell, until somebody used the magic for the first time, you could never tell how good or otherwise at the magic they would be, and therefore how much of a threat or otherwise they might be. So that really kept me on my toes, as it were, when I was reading this book. And even more so because in the land of Abram we also have these things called fiends, which are magical creatures, and Elle has quite a lot of information about fiends on her channel, so I would suggest, if you're interested, to go and check out those videos about that. But all I'm going to say is dragons. I mean, need I say more? Dragons are cool. Going back to the action scenes for a moment, I also wanted to mention that Elle is not afraid of drafting consequences for her characters. She puts her characters in dangerous situations, and there are consequences, and that's something to be aware of going in, because I think that it's really, really important. Sometimes, you know, it's sad and it's emotional, and I did feel very emotional at times reading this book, but I also think it's really important for the realism of the book and the level of integration that you have into the story and the immersiveness of the story, for there to be real life consequences to the things that our characters are going through in this book. And it's brutal at times, and things don't always turn out peachy. And that's important, I think, because, you know, it can't always be sunshine and rainbows all the time. That's not reality. And although this is a fantasy story and you could argue it doesn't have to be realistic, I think there needs to be a certain level of realism in a book to keep you engaged. And that's something I really, really appreciated as the reader I am now. When I was much younger, I hated where there were consequences and I just wanted everything to be happy endings, but now that I'm a bit more well-read, I can appreciate the fact that sometimes there need to be consequences for actions, and Elle was not afraid for there to be consequences. Something else that I thought was really unique in this book and that I really enjoyed was the way that there were subtle references throughout the book to the passage of time, because it really gave a greater understanding of the world and the scope and size of the world that we were dealing with. So for example, you know, I read books quite quickly. When you're reading a book in that sort of short time scale, it can be quite difficult to tell how time is passing for the characters, and in my head time does tend to pass quite quickly in the fantasy book, but Elle was able to slow that down by saying, you know, it's been a couple of weeks at this point, it's been a month at this point, and I was like, oh, this is going a lot more slowly in their time than I was imagining. And that's actually really helpful, because it, like I said, because there's a bit of travelling in this book, it really helps to give perspective to the size of the world that we're dealing with. And it's a subtle minor point, but again, it adds to the realism and the immersive nature of the story. Like I said, I've done a more thorough review over on Goodreads, so I'm going to leave it here for now. Needless to say, I've really, really, really enjoyed this book. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're new to epic fantasy. I think it is a really good place to start. There is a large cast of characters, but it's easy to follow. The world is complicated, but I could tell that there's a lot of places for this world to continue to grow and be built on, but not all of that is thrown at you all at once. The characters are really relatable, the politics are intricate but not overly complicated, and it makes sense once you get to the point that you're supposed to understand what's going on. And yeah, I just really thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I already can't wait for the next one to come out, which I think Ella said that she's going to hopefully try and release next year. So I hope that that's the case, because I'm going to really look forward to that, and I will probably be rereading this when it comes out in March. So I will link Elle's channel down below so that you can go and watch all of her videos about Peace and Turmoil. Like I said, I would highly recommend picking up this book when it comes out. Thanks again to Elle for sending me a copy. I absolutely loved it. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button. I'd be so grateful. And I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.